All right, so since we have our lighting in place, we can now move on with adding some textures, materials, and colors to our scene. But before we do that, we want to make some slight adjustments to our layout and add a couple of panels that we'll need when we're doing texturing and that kind of stuff. So we'll hop into Cinema and start doing that. So the first thing that we can do is open up our material panel, which you hit this little button here. And then you basically get this empty panel with nothing in it. And that is because we don't have any materials in our scene yet. So that's why it's empty. So the first thing that we can do is just go ahead and press this little plus here, and that will create the default Redshift material. So once I've opened this, you kind of get this little panel here of attributes, and you can get quite far with just tweaking these little things here. But to actually make some proper adjustments to your materials, you need to do that in the shader graph or node editor. So if I double click this, we'll get this separate window here called the node editor. And this might look a bit scary, but once you kind of get the overall grasp of it, this is by far the easiest way of working with materials in 3D. And the best thing is that usually all of these other 3D softwares also use node editors, which means that you're basically getting the overall idea, which can then translate to other softwares. So that's really good. Now the problem with this node editor is that it's a fairly new one. They added it in the last couple of versions of Cinema. And as far as I'm concerned, some of the features that the old node editor hasn't been added to this one, which means that I would rather teach you how the old one works. And as I said, the overall principle of working in a node space translates between both of them. It's just that the UI looks a bit different. And I know that this node editor is still under development, and I don't feel too comfortable with teaching you how to work within this one since I haven't done that much myself. So luckily, Cinema allows us to use the old one still, which is great. So I'll actually go ahead and close this one down, and I'll delete this material because this kind of comes with the new node editor baked into it. So I'll just delete that, and we'll come up to Edit, Preferences, head into the Renderer and Redshift settings here. And to switch to our old node editor, we'll just uncheck Node Materials for presets, like that. We'll close this down, and once we add a new default material now, and double click it, you'll get this other node editor up instead. Now, the way we navigate in the shader graph is very similar to the way you navigate in Cinema. I hold Alt and I scroll click to kind of pan around. I hold Alt and press right click to zoom in and out. And that's basically all you need to know. And then you have the search panel to search for different nodes. We can also hit Shift C to search for nodes. And yeah, so we're going to be doing a lot of work within this space. So naturally, we want to have this kind of docked in our layout. As I said previously, I usually don't have the render view within the same window because things will get a bit cluttered. But since I kind of want to view everything in one window to easily see everything, this is just the way we're going to do it for now. So I usually like to dock my shader graph at the bottom of our window. So I'll just kind of take this hamburger icon, drag it down here. So we can kind of see that it ends up on the same width as our timeline here. So I'll just release there like that. And I'll just kind of adjust the sizes of certain panels just to make it a bit more comfortable for us. In the Redshift render view, you can also hold Alt, scroll, drag to kind of pan around. And then you can scroll, zoom in and out. I just kind of want to view our character in a good size just so I can see what we're doing while we're editing things. And obviously, we're not going to need the material panel open at all times, so you can close this in or out, whether you're using it or not. But for now, since we are going to do a lot of material changes and stuff, it might be good to have it visible. You can dock this somewhere else also if you want. Maybe you want it somewhere around here. That can also be a good idea. But yeah, obviously, we want to be able to see the changes that we are making when we are editing our materials and so on. So having the Redshift render view and the shader graph visible is something that I highly recommend. Once you're happy with the layout, I would recommend maybe saving that one down just so you can come back to it later when you want. So as I previously have mentioned, if you come up to Window, Customize, and then Save Layout As, you can save the layout to whatever custom naming you want. So I'll have this set to rendering. But yeah, with that in place, I think we can go ahead and add this first material to our background. So to do that, we'll just easily take our material, just drag it and drop it on top of whatever object you want to apply it to. You can also select the object and then just right click, hit apply. like that. Now to see these changes that we've done, we'll need to activate our interactive progressive renderer. So I'll just go ahead and do that. And now you can see that we have a very messy, strange image. And that is due to the fact that we have a highly reflective surface as a floor, which will reflect all of the surrounding HDRI and sun and stuff. So the first thing that we can actually do is just in our shader graph here, just have our redshift material selected. I'll just scroll down to reflection. Just expand that, and we'll set the roughness to somewhere around 0.5 or something like that. So the roughness basically means that it's matting out all of the reflections. And I want some slight reflective surface, but nothing too much. I can also maybe go ahead and lower the weight of the reflection, and that just means how heavy the reflection will be. So I think I'll set it to somewhere around 0.5 for both of them. And obviously we want to change our colors on our background. And I kind of want some warm but bright orangey color. So if I just come up to diffuse here, so at the top of our base properties, I can just expand the arrow here next to the color, like that. And now we can kind of start to adjust the HSV values here. So I'll probably want to have it somewhere around like this orangey tone. I'll just adjust the saturation here. And as we're kind of working, you're seeing what this does to our scene. So this is very helpful to have this activated while you're tweaking colors and stuff. And I'll also just adjust the brightness quite a bit. Somewhere around there. I kind of want the overall scene to be a bit brighter. So we can come up to our dome light here and just increase the intensity, maybe to somewhere around 1.4. That kind of gives it an overall just brighter look. And I'll kind of just make the background just slightly, maybe a bit less saturated, a bit brighter. Something like that. I still want a fairly warm tone. And of course, as we're working, we'll want to make sure that we structure and organize our scene. So we'll want to call this material ground, since we applied it to the ground, like that. And the second material that we can create is the skin, actually, since a large part of our character will be made up of these colors, especially the face. So I'll go ahead and just control drag the ground material here, like that. And we'll call this skin. And we'll go through and select all of the pieces of our character that we want the skin material to be applied to. So I'll just pause the IPR for now, just so we can work a bit more smoothly. And I'll hop to our perspective view, just so we can go through and select each of these body parts. So I'll just select the forearm, the upper arm. I'll hold shift while I'm doing this, the head. Can't select those. We'll need to select those manually. Here we go. Ear. We'll also want to select these. Upper arm. And I'll also want to select the legs. They are up here. Great. I think these are the ones, right? Yeah, okay. And with all of those selected, I'll just come to the skin material that we just made, right click, and then hit apply. So now you can see that all of those body parts have now been affected by the new material that we just made. And obviously we don't want the exact same color for our skin as our background. I'm kind of seeing some kind of, Simpson-ish yellow, like really warm, cartoonish yellow. So I'll go ahead and select our skin material. I'll activate our IPR again, just so we can see what we're doing. And I'll start to adjust the colors here in our diffuse. So we want it more towards the yellow, like that. Still like on the red spectrum, but still yellow. And then I'll just crank up the brightness because we want it to be really bright. And then the saturation up quite a bit as well. And then we'll just kind of look at what this is doing. This feels a bit too, I kind of want it to be a bit more orangey than that. Yeah, I think that's nice. It's a very, very vibrant and poppy color. So I think it's going to make her face pop a lot, like when you have the contrast between her skin and her eyes. And another material that we can make is actually the material for the hair, since that's also a really big part of her design. So I'll go ahead and control drag and drop the skin material, and I'll call this the hair material. I'll go ahead and pause the IPR for now, and I'll go through and select all of the parts of our design that is going to be affected by this material. So these big pom-poms will be affected, so I'll just go ahead and apply those. The volume measure as well, containing all of the hair details. So I'll go ahead and drag and drop that. And also the eyebrows, since they are, in my case, they will at least be the same color as the hair. Maybe not in yours. So I'll just go ahead and do that. And we can go ahead and activate our IPR. That's looking quite cool, but I think we can go for something else than a bright yellow for the hair. I'm kind of seeing some form of very warm brownish color. So I'll just take my H value here and just drag it to somewhere around like the really bright red area. And I'll just lower the brightness quite a bit, something like this. And also maybe the saturation just a tad. That's looking quite nice actually. And it's kind of up to you whether you want a shiny type of hair material or if you want, completely matte. This is completely up to you to play around with. I don't want too much reflection on these materials. I kind of like the super smooth matte surface that you get when you really crank up the roughness on these materials. Maybe something like this works. And if you feel like the rendering takes too long, then maybe try and activate the region renderer. So if you hold shift and drag in your IPR, you can just focus on rendering just the part that you are working on currently. I think the surface for the hair looks really nice as it is right now. So I think we can move ahead from this. And since we are working with the hair, it kind of makes sense to add a material for the hairband. So I'll go ahead and do that. So I'll just go ahead and control drag our hair, name this hairband, and I think the torus here is our hairband. Yeah, so I'll just drag and drop on that. And naturally I want another color here, maybe something a bit more poppy that will stand out, maybe towards the pinkish direction, a bit brighter, I'd say, something like that. Yeah. And if you want a completely different surface here, of course we can make this very reflective just to give some contrast in the materials. Something like that might look really nice. And since we're kind of working in this area of our character, it kind of makes sense to go along with the eyes because that will do a lot to the expression of our character. So I'll go ahead and add a material for our eyes, as in these white parts of the eyes, not the iris. And I'll create a completely new material for that actually. So I just go ahead and hit the plus button here. And I'll go ahead and find wherever I put that eye material. I think that's here. Yeah, great. I'll just go ahead and add that. And since it's just a gray standard material now, that will look a bit odd. And since our iris is actually as a child of our eye sphere, that will also be affected. But once we add another material to that sphere, that will then override this material. Anyways, we'll just name this eye. And I'll just go ahead and find our material node here. If you can't find anything in here, you can just right click, content, and then hit frame all, and that will just frame everything within your node space, and then you automatically find it. In this case, I kind of want a very illustrative look for our character, so then it kind of just makes sense to use a straight up color as your material. I don't want any real shading going on this, at least not that much. So if you would just take this material and turn it all white, you wouldn't really get that. Maybe in this case, since we have a very bright scene, you would, but I want something that feels super, super flat, so you kind of get this illustrative feel. And what you can do then is, instead of using the white color here in the diffuse, you can create just a plain color node, which is called a color constant. So if you just search for constant. So since I have my workspace so compressed here, I can't really search for things and have them pop up here. But I usually like to work with just hitting Shift-C and searching instead. So I'll just go ahead and do that. I'll search for color constant, hit enter. And by default, it's white, which is perfect. So instead of actually having the material being plugged into the output, we can just plug the color constant straight into the output. And that basically means that Redshift will just output a straight up color with no lighting affecting it or anything. The problem is that it will be a bit grayed out. And the reason for this is just the way Cinema handles colors with ACES. But if I want to add just some slight bit of shading in combination with this color that I just added, I usually like to blend the material with the color constant. And the way you can do that is by using a material blender. So we'll go ahead and hit Shift-C, add a material blender. Like that. And we'll just add our Redshift material with the white diffuse here as our base material, like that. And we'll go ahead and add our color constant as the layer color 1, like that. And if you connect this to the surface, like that, nothing will really happen because currently we are not blending the color constant with the base material. But if I start changing this from black to white, because black means no blending and white means 100% blending. So currently this is the only blending you'll see, but if you set this to like 50%, you're blending basically 50% between this material and just a straight up color. So then you're kind of getting some shading, but also a very flat illustrative look by blending in the color. Maybe using this on the white part of the eyes isn't the best way of showcasing this, but you'll see this very clearly once we do this to the iris. And I believe our default material here has a very high reflection, so I'll just go ahead and set this to 100% rough, so we're not getting any reflections in there. And we'll go ahead and add this to our iris as well, but we'll do a duplicate material here. So I'll just control drag this one and I'll name it iris, and I'll apply this to our sphere, which is supposed to be the iris. And I'll make sure that our iris material is selected. And we'll go ahead and change this to a like warmer red is kind of what I'm seeing for her eye color. So I'll just go ahead and tweak the color here, like a very, very warm red, almost pinkish. 100% saturation, maybe a bit darker, so something like that. Oh, right. So the reason why we're not getting anything is because we still have the white diffuse working here with our material tag. But if we plug this color constant into our material tag and add it to our base properties diffuse color, we're basically driving both the color that we're blending and the diffuse color of our redshift material like this. And now you can kind of see that once we start to blend between these materials, you're getting very different results. So this is 100% the diffuse material. This is 100% the plain color. So if I put it somewhere in the middle here, we're kind of getting a very like nice blended look. So maybe even flatter, so something like that. Might even want to set it at like 90%. So it's almost completely flat, just a slight hint of shading. And I'll go ahead and play with her iris color a bit here as well. Might like it a bit better if it's somewhere around here maybe. Yeah, I like that. That feels nice. So just to kind of show you the difference between having a straight up material with a diffuse color compared to what we have right now, you're kind of seeing that we're catching a lot of indirect lighting and a lot of lights from our scene to kind of affect the color that we have. And since I want this very illustrative look, it makes more sense to blend in flat colors, I think. So that's kind of why I like to use this trick. And we'll go ahead and add a material for our mouth as well. And it makes sense to use this iris material that we just created because we're going to go for a similar effect. So I'll just go ahead and control drag this iris material. I'll locate our mouth sweep, which I believe is this one. Yeah. And then we'll also rename this mouth, and I'll just go ahead and add this. Now, obviously, I don't want the exact same color here, but I do want this very flat shading that we have here, because I'm kind of just seeing this as if it was a stroke being done on a cartoon, for example. So I want to keep the illustrative look going. So I'll stick with the material blending technique here where we're blending in this color, but I'll want to change the color so it feels more like a stroke being drawn on top of her. So I'll just kind of reduce the brightness here. And I'll just darken this quite a bit, so maybe something like that. So it's got some warmth to it, but still very, very dark. I just kind of experiment and try things out here. And I can also go ahead and experiment with the blending, because that will do a lot to the look of this. So maybe something like that. I don't want it to be completely black. I still want it to have some warmth to it, but I think that feels good. Now, an issue that I have here with our eyes, eyebrows, and mouth here is that we have these shadows casting on top of our skin material. And since I want this to feel like a very illustrative character, I want these features to feel like they're part of her face, not just laying on top of it. And something that I like to do then is just to turn off shadow casting for these materials. And since we are using Redshift, this is a very simple thing to do. You can easily exclude shadow casting features on certain objects without that affecting the entire look too much. So what I'll do is that I'll select the face symmetry here that's containing the eyes and the eyebrows, and the sweep that is the mouth. So I'll select these objects, I will right click, and I will come up to render tags and then hit the RS objects. So that stands for Redshift object. By default, we'll hop into the visibility tab here, and that's where we'll want to stay. We can go ahead and uncheck some of these boxes and see what they do. So if we turn off primary visibility, you'll see that makes her look horrible. But this turns off the visibility of the object, but not shadow casting or anything else. So that's just the primary visibility. So if we turn this back on and turn off cast shadows, now that does something completely different to our character. So now we can just feel like the eyes and mouth are kind of drawn on top of her face rather than just laying in front of it. And that kind of makes me want to tweak the materials a bit because we're not getting that much contrast between her eyes and her skin. So I'll hop into my eye material again. And we can't really make the material brighter than it is unless we check this little box here in our material blender. So if I check this, we're basically using a blending mode, which is kind of combining the two whites until it goes completely pitch white. So if I turn this up to 100%, this will basically be going completely white, which is what we want. So we're getting a bit more contrast looking at the skin and the eyes. And we can actually do the same thing that we have done with our eye and stuff, where we are blending a color. We can do that with our skin as well. Because since we have so much light coming from this direction, you're going to get a lot of highlights going on here, at least when I use this yellow color. So the way to kind of stop that is to blend in the flat color of yellow on top of our material. And that's kind of what we've been doing with our eye and mouth and iris material here. So I'll go ahead and do the same thing for our skin then. So I'll hop into my skin material. I'll hit C, search for material blender, like that. I'll go ahead and copy this color. So I'll shift select this little hexadecimal icon here, so then I can copy just this color code for this palette, like that. I'll hit Shift C, search for color constant, and I'll paste that into the hexadecimal field as well, like that. And I'll make sure that I plug my color constant into my diffuse, so then we can drive this color from this color constant, like this. But I want to plug everything into my material blender, so I'll plug the material into the base color of the material, and I'll add the color right on top like we've been doing before. And then I'll plug the material blender into the output, like that. And this isn't doing anything yet because we haven't started blending our color constant into the material blender, but once I start sliding this, you'll kind of see what I'm doing. So if I just set this to 100%, that's just flat color. But if I set it to like 50%, something like that, we are kind of reducing some of the contrast in our lighting from our skin material. And this might be something that's, you might think that it looks better when not blending the color like this. I kind of like, as I said, these illustrative looks. So I kind of want to blend it somewhere around, let's say 50%, something like that. So now, as you can tell, we're kind of bringing in the flat yellow color, which kind of makes the material brighter in the darker parts, but in the lighter parts, we're also making it a bit darker. So that's exactly what I wanted for that. So by kind of reducing the contrast and the realism of some of these materials, we're kind of making them very illustrative and flat and stylized at the same time. And I think that's going to work really well when we start adding these very realistic materials like the fabric material and the material for the blade of our sword and stuff. So that's kind of why I want to blend these color constants with our material blenders. You might think that it feels like a bit of a overkill just to do these small tweaks for these very few materials, but they will do a lot of things in the long run, I think, for the overall look of our design. So with that, I think we can kind of round it off for this lesson, and then we'll get into more materials in the next one. So I'll see you over there.